Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the next week here in online learning. I wanted to, in our first lesson of the week, I wanted to take a little bit of a different direction. I realized as we we're going into some of the first battles of the Civil War that we got to get on the same page with some of the goals that I have when it comes to discussing these battles, as well as some of the vocabulary necessary to truly understand what's being talked about in each one of these battle talks. So I want to kick into that first part. So some of the different lessons, some of the main things we're going to talk about battle after battle after battle as we go into so many different pivotal events within the Civil War. So here are the overall objectives I have for overall things I'm going to hit in all the battles, hopefully. So our lessons will focus on traits of successful people, also traits of the unsuccessful, what makes someone unsuccessful in what they do. Another big thing is the senselessness of war. And you'll see that this week big time. What makes war so tough and terrible, and why we should truly try to avoid it. I mean, we don't fully understand that ourselves since we are not soldiers, but if you have a family member that's a soldier, you might really have an understanding of that. War is real, and war has terrible repercussions, and the Civil War is no different. We'll also talk about tactics, talk about some of the strategies that Civil War soldiers used, and also how they sometimes apply to today, and how they use some of those same strategies today. And then lastly, as we go from some of the different battles, we're going to talk about the experiences of the regular soldier. What was it like to be a regular soldier on the ground there in one of these Civil War battles? Now, the other aspect here is I want us to have a common vocabulary. So for today, the big thing that I want you to do is I want you to rehearse these terms. I set up a Quizlet study set for you to go through some flashcards on some of the main terms about the Civil War and things that I think you need to have in your back pocket as I'm talking about some of these different battles. So here we go. You have this Quizlet study set. I want you to play the match game so you can kind of match these up and make sure you're good with these terms here. You can do it any way you want to, but altogether on Friday's quizzes, these terms are going to show up there. So on your assessments, I'm going to look for you to do a good job on the quizzes. I want you to make sure you're good on these terms. So here we go. First one here, casualties. A lot of times this gets confused with total dead. This is not just people that are killed in action. These are counting the people that are killed, wounded, or also even captured, like taken prisoner of war. When I say Confederacy or Confederate, I'm just talking about the Southern forces. I will rarely call them the Southern forces. I'll call them the Confederacy or Confederate forces. The commander. The commander is your top general. So every time I'm talking about the top of the top, the highest general there is, I'll call that person the commander. Below them, in the hierarchy of the military, you have your corps commanders. They're usually also generals, but I will differentiate that by saying corps commanders. So someone like Stonewall Jackson was never the top commander of the Confederacy, never the highest ranking general. He was always under Joseph Johnston or Robert E. Lee. He was a corps commander. He was your second in command, and he had to report to his top commander. The cavalry are the soldiers that ride on horseback, and they're usually used to scout positions or to cover the movements of their army. But soldiers on horseback. Breastworks or entrenchments. These are defenses, and they can be made up of trees. They can be made up of dirt. They can be made up of rocks that are piled high. But any kind of thing that you can kind of make a ready shift trench are breastworks or entrenchments. If I say the word trench, I'm talking about a World War I style trench, and they did use some trenches later in the war, but the quickly made pieces where they just try to like scatter together a wall real quick, those are called breastworks or entrenchments. A bayonet charge. If you take a look at the picture there, you see these gentlemen having a blade affixed to their rifles. They're going on a bayonet charge. They're trying to have hand-to-hand fighting where they're going to try to pierce that thing into somebody's body. It's a gruesome attack. And a lot of times, a lot of these battles ended up being bayonet charges. Border states. The border states are the states that stayed with the Union that were slave states. So states like Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, and you can also include West Virginia, even though they were not a separate state at the beginning of the Civil War. But these are considered border states. They stayed loyal to the Union. They did not turn Confederate, but they were slave states. A siege is a tactic that Ulysses S. Grant uses heavily. It's an attempt to starve out your enemy. Surround them, keep them from going anywhere, keep them from getting any supplies, starve them out. Here we get into some ranks. A private is your average, lowest level soldier. Anybody could be a private. And so as soon as you enter the force, if you do not have any role as a commander, you commonly entered as a private, and that's pretty much what everybody was. A colonel is someone that either had some education or some military background, and they're going to be a leader of a regiment. They're going to command a regiment that is 1,000 soldiers in Civil War terms. They're going to go into battle, and they're going to go in there and going to fight with the soldiers. They're not going to stay back behind on a horse. They're going to go out there and they're going to fight too alongside the rest of the regiment. A regiment is 1,000 men. One thing really cool about the Civil War is commonly a lot of these regiments were from about the same area. Now, a lot of our York County regiments included York County men, Adams County men, Dauphin County men from the Harrisburg area, and so sometimes even Lancaster guys, but almost everybody was from the same kind of area. Now, below that, you could also use the term of a company. A company is a group of 100 men, and 10 companies made up a regiment, which would then total 1,000. But for the most part, you serve with guys that were, in today's terms, like like an hour driving distance. And so they're really kind of hometown boys that you got to really know. A division is a group of 10,000 men, and altogether, they usually would be from the same state, but at least they'd be from the same region of the country. But yeah, a group of 10,000 men. So altogether, 10 regiments made up a division. A corps. The corps is the biggest grouping of soldiers that we'll discuss within the class. Usually that was about 30,000 men. It all depends, but around 30,000, especially in the Confederacy. But altogether, usually the Army was divided into multiple corps. It's not corps, so please don't say that. Corpse is a dead body. A corps, as you see here, is a grouping of soldiers. A parole paper. A parole paper is what you're given if you're a prisoner, but then they're not going to keep you prisoner. They're not going to put you in a prison. What you have to do here is you got to sign this paper to say, I'm never going to fight again. If you catch me trying to fight against you again, you can kill me. You can execute me. So I promise never ever to fight again against your side. This was used a lot of times in the Civil War, and you're basically just kind of making them promise to say, hey, I fought. I'm going to go home. I'm not going to try to fight again. You're signing a parole paper. You're giving them parole. A deserter is a soldier that runs away from combat, or even just runs away from their regiment at any time. A lot of times these soldiers really didn't want to fight, or maybe there weren't many supplies, there wasn't much food, and they got sick of war, and they deserted. They left their force. Now, if you get caught, punishment in most cases, execution. And so if you're a deserter and you run away and you get caught, you're in serious trouble. Your rations are your food. And you actually see on the picture here, you see some of your basic rations here. It is not a fantastic thing, especially they got so sick of that salt pork. They got so sick of the hardtack crackers, disgusting stuff, but they had to have food that was going to last a long time. Your rations are your food. Infantry. That just means your soldiers on foot. So this is your biggest force. It's your foot soldiers, the infantry. Artillery, they're your soldiers that man the cannon. And so the big guns. And I believe this is your last one here. Your flank is the edge of your force. And a lot of times I'll mention in these battles that Robert E. Lee or whomever is going to try to attack the flank. Usually the flank was the weakest and the middle of the force was the strongest. That's where the headquarters was, and that's what they tried to keep heavily protected. So the flank was the weakest. If you could get around the flank, you could usually cause that army to have to retreat, and then you win the battle. So use the Quizlet study set to practice these. Make sure you're good with these. Honestly, you can do this any way you want to. Just make sure you're good to go for Friday's quizzes to make sure you understand what these terms are. And my big goal here is to make sure you have an understanding of basic vocabulary where when I say something in one of these battle talks, you got it. You understand what it is. All right. Thanks. Have a good day and a good week.